Hey guys, Jay, welcome back to the channel. So I wanted to talk a little bit about video games today. Yeah, mostly about why I don't play them anymore. Now I grew up in the '80s, and it was a really unique time for video games. I mean, I was fortunate enough to actually be in the middle of a video game crash and actually a video game resurgence and a golden age of video games. So for some of you guys might know, around 1981, 82, the video game market crashed. Atari, ColecoVision, Intellivision, all of these companies were making really terrible games, mostly Atari, and it caused the video game market to crash. And pretty much around that time, nobody wanted video games. So around 1981 or 82, video games had pretty much died. A lot of video games ended up going to arcades, where they really took off in arcades. And I actually had a small opportunity because many of my cousins who were here at the time, they had a huge library of games from Atari. Because again, around that time they were selling off Atari games for like pennies to the dollar. It was ridiculous. So my cousins had Pac Man. My cousins had Mario Brothers. My cousins had so many different video games that it was hilarious. Asteroids, all these things, but they were all for the Atari AVS, and it was primitive, man. Like it was like if you just do a Google search for Atari AVS, and you'll find you'll find a 2800 or something like that. You'll find it. But they were fun. You know what I mean? Like Pac-Man wasn't Pac-Man in the arcades, but it was a fun system. Um, and at the time when I first started playing those, they were neat. They were little distractions, but they weren't engaging. There wasn't really nothing there. You'd pick it up for like a minute or two, maybe 2 minutes. You play for a couple rounds, and you put it away. There really wasn't much to it. But another 3 years later, maybe even sooner than that, in around 1984, or was it 83? I can't remember. Um, Nintendo actually started hitting the scene, and that's where things really started to change. Um, Super Mario Brothers, the Rob the Robot, a lot of the black box games like Donkey Kong, those things were absolutely killer. And in a lot of ways, it brought the arcade experience home, and it was just a golden age for video games from then until the early '90s when they started moving into 16 bits. Because the 8-bit technology for Nintendo and Sega for the Sega Master System, which is the system that I owned. I actually had Space Harrier, I had Double Dragon, I had a whole bunch of great games on the Sega Master System, and I loved each and every one of them. For the Nintendo Entertainment System, I had Battletoads, I had Zelda, I had The Link to the Past. I had so many different. The Adventure of Link. I had so many different video games around that time, and then we moved into 16 bits with the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis, the TurboGrafx 16, and again, things technology started moving from like the Atari to the Nintendo to the Super Nintendo to the PlayStation. Right later on in the late '90s, early 2000s, and things just kept going and going and going. And every single time they created a brand new video game system, it just got more powerful, bigger, better, badder. The graphics, the fidelity, everything just kept jumping exponentially. You went from like pixels down to like almost 3 dimensions with Star Fox, and then from there you moved into the N64 with actual 3 dimensions. The PlayStation with its incredible graphics, and then from there you went to the next stage. The PlayStation 2, and all the blocky graphics from the past moved into this amazing, almost close to real life graphics, right? Or at least as close as you could around that time. And then from there, you moved on to the Xbox 360. You moved on to the PlayStation 3, the PlayStation 4, the PlayStation 5. Things just continued, and the graphics and the fidelity just kept getting better and better and better and better. Moving on to today, and I was huge into video games. I would play them nonstop, and around it would be pretty much the typical thing with your mom and your parents and your dad, and they were like, that's gonna rot your brain, right? That's sitting too close to the TV is gonna ruin your eyes. all these crazy old wives' tales and things like that, just to kind of get you to get off of the place, the video games, and actually go outside and play, right? Do some homework, do whatever chores that you needed to do, right? And I do have to say that I grew up in a time where I was able to enjoy toys and I was able to enjoy video games. But video games, for the better part of my life, was actually a huge thing. I remember playing games like role playing games were a big thing for me, like Zelda, Link to the Past, Chrono Trigger, right? Final Fantasy, right? And then you just get Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 8, Final Fantasy 9, 10, 11, right? You got Dragon Warrior. You got all these great video games. And then, of course, let's not talk about the 90s and how much fun fighting games started to come into it. I mean, Street Fighter, Tekken, Mortal Kombat, right? It's just a huge hit list of amazing games that I was playing like from now until the end of time, and I felt like it was going to be like that. And it's funny how a lot of those older games are getting reissued or brand new remakes now and today, right? But as it inevitably happens, just like with toys, I actually ended up growing out of video games. Not the way you would expect, though. My brother is still huge, and Dex is still huge into video games. He loves video games. But when I really started concentrating on my career and really getting a grounding into like making money and having debt, which really sucks, I started having to pull back on video games. I didn't have much free time as I did when I was younger, and video games sort of got away from me. I couldn't keep up with the level of fidelity that was around the kind of Twitch gaming that was required. A lot of first person shooters, which I'm not too fond of, to be perfectly honest with you. I know there are a lot of people who are really obsessed with first person shooters. And then VR came into it, and that is an entire different ball of wax. And I just found myself unable to keep up with all the advancing technologies that were going around. I was fascinated by them. I really was. And every now and then, I will go back to a video game and try something out. As a matter of fact, I'm a huge fan of the Final Fantasy series, and when Final Fantasy Remake came around, I literally got lost in that game. So much to the point where I ended up into getting back into old habits, where I was literally just grinding at the arena stage for weeks. Quite literally, someone would walk into the room and say, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm grinding," and they were literally like, "You've been on the same level for weeks." I'm like, "Yeah, I just gotta get my characters a few more levels up," until I actually maxed out my characters, and that was amazing. But again, I started falling into old patterns for video games. Now, but those experiences are far and few between. I'm still very much an old school gamer in that sense. I really like like what are considered vintage games today. Super Mario Brothers, Battletoads, Contra. All those 8-bit games that I really grew up with and loving. And you know what? Younger people are actually getting into those games again, right? With this with the collections that are being available on the Switch and the Xbox collections and the PlayStation collections. It's fascinating seeing how these things actually play out, and the fact that everything is cyclical, everything goes around in circles. But one of the reasons why I stopped playing video games was because the video games actually stopped being interesting to me. I am very much of an old school gamer, and I do like platforms. I do like side scrollers. I do like a lot of that. But I grew up in a constant integration of video games, literally from like 8-bit technology to 16-bit technology to 24-bit technology to wherever the heck we are right now, 128 bits, all that kind of stuff, right? I saw the progression of video games and where it was heading, and went from regular 2D sprites all the way to virtual reality. And it's been an incredible ride seeing all those things develop. But at some point, my interests actually changed. I actually started, getting more interested in doing stuff like conventions. I was watching more anime. I went back to watching cartoons. And then I started actually getting back into collecting toys. And my tastes and, my hobbies actually did end up changing. And what I ended up doing a lot of times was actually watching Dex, just speed run through games or just play through games and watching him almost like watching real life, like real time Twitch TV. You know what I mean? It was crazy seeing these things come up, and I was living vicariously through Dex. Finishing games and seeing the endings and watching the story progress. And in a lot of ways, I think that many parents are actually going through the same situations where they who grew up with video games and seeing the progression of video games through 8-bit, through 16-bit, through 64-bit, through 128-bit, PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, 5, Xbox 360, Xbox 360, Xbox One, Xbox One S, Xbox One S, which is just ridiculous in the naming convention. And seeing all these other ones like Neo Geo and TurboGrafx 16 and all these other great systems that have come and gone. It's been an amazing ride. And I think that the enjoyment now with video games is actually seeing younger people pick up games and seeing the experiences coming through there. But I think I realized something while looking at the progression of video games. I realize now that there is an immersion aspect of video games which can really get away from you. And I kind of feel like my parents now, where I look at some people playing video games and I'm like, man, you really should take a break. I mean, I often look at Dex and I think to myself, Dex, you should really, maybe we should step away from this for a little bit because he can play for hours on end. And switch between multiple games. I didn't, we never had that option before. We could never pause the video game in the middle of playing and then move into another game and then start playing that and then go back to the first game that you were playing to actually get those points back. And the actual time, attention span of people to actually keep going with multiple video games is incredible. I was actually really impressed by how many. Like, he was at one point he was playing 4 different games at the same time. I was like, wow, that is crazy. That was absolutely ridiculous. I could never do that. Back in the day, you had to stop the game. If you have a save state, you had a save state, and you just pop the video game out, you put another cartridge back in, and you're off to another game. But nowadays, that doesn't even happen. The immersion never has to stop. You can literally stop in the middle of a level and then continue on with a new game by pausing it and just moving out of that. Starting a new game, going into a certain stage, pause that and go back to the original game that you played, or start another game. It's actually really bonkers in that sense. But I started getting into more different, varied hobbies. Like I said, going back to toys, going back to watching anime, going back to watching cartoons, movies. I really got into movies at one point, and then there was YouTube. Getting into YouTube. Starting to become a content creator, getting more content made every single week, and keeping up a regular schedule. My job changed. Actually, I lost my job, and I had to actually do other things to keep up, my income. And it's those types of experiences which led me to actually stopping video games. But I always want to go back eventually. I mean, like I said, when Dex told me that Final Fantasy VII Remake was coming out, I lost my mind, and I literally ended up borrowing his PlayStation, and for weeks on end, almost months, I was just grinding. It was literally like I'd never left. So getting back into video games is probably not that hard to do. But I also found that in doing that, I had less and less time to do the other hobbies that I was involved in and the other activities that required a lot more time. It is really very much a give and take situation. And it's like that in real life. For every action, Newton was right. He really was. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. For the equilibrium that I required to actually play video games took away time from where I was actually needing to do other things like, collecting toys or working on projects or doing other things and other activities. So it is really a delicate balance with a video game scenario. Do I want to go back to playing video games? Probably one day. Do I think video games are eating up time that could be used for other things? Actually, yes, I do. But it's not a waste of time. You're going to get a ton of people who are always going to tell you, especially people who don't play video games and have never played video games. They're always going to tell you the same situation. Oh, it's a waste of time. You're rotting your brain. You could be doing something more productive with your time, which is not untrue. You could. But just like collecting toys or any other hobby, right? Collecting stamps, collecting comic books, collecting anything, or doing extracurricular things like a side hustle, a different type of job, having an Amazon store or having an eBay store, right? Or just heck, having your own e-commerce store using Shopify or WooCommerce or anything like that. Everything takes its own amount of time. You could even be flipping homes for all we know, right? But then you have to actually, buy the home, change around the interior, flip, to make it into a sellable state. That all takes time. The weekends, they're pretty much gone. And that actually is the decision that you got to make. What is your time worth? What is it that you want to spend your time doing? Do you want to spend your time building, models like model ships, model cars, model Gundams? Do you want to spend your time collecting action figures and, chasing after exclusives at conventions? Do you want to go to conventions? Do you want to go to an anime convention? Do you want to go to a comic book convention? Or do you want to sit down and go play video games and, level up your character, play with friends online, or go to a video game convention and collect the vintage video games that you had as a kid, or all that kind of great stuff. At the end of the day, it really is up to you. Your hobby should be yours, and you should be able to enjoy it to the fullest. And never let anybody tell you that what you're doing is wrong. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. Whenever somebody literally comes up to you, I didn't like it when my parents were doing it to me, and I'm pretty sure no one did. And in some cases, it's really a terrible situation where someone's nagging about how much of a waste of time any sort of hobby is to you or to anybody else, actually deprived you of that and convinced you that it was a waste of time. And I think that's actually a tragedy. If you enjoy something so much that you want to keep doing it, then you should do it. If you want to spend money on something that you think is valuable, but it doesn't seem valuable to anybody else, it's your money. Go ahead and do whatever you want to do with it. Don't ever let anybody tell you that what you're doing isn't important. If it's important enough to you to keep doing it, then go ahead and do it. For me, video games, unfortunately, have taken a bit of a, sidestep. I don't need to play them right now. I've got way too many other hobbies that I need to concentrate on. But there's always that little bit of myself who wants to go back to video games, who wants to build an arcade cabinet, who wants to get into the newest Final Fantasy video game, or sometimes a really cool game, which I think is going to be awesome. But dedicating myself to that is very, very difficult. But just like anything else, I find the time to watch the brand new episode of Skeleton Crew. I find the time to actually, pick up the newest exclusive for my action figures. I find the time to actually do those side hustles that I need to make extra money. And just like video games, if you want to find the time to actually do them and enjoy them, then that's exactly what you should do. Don't let anybody tell you what you should and should not be doing with your time. It's your time, it's your money, and you're a grown-ass individual, and you can do whatever the fuck you want. Guys, I just wanted to share a little bit about why I stopped playing video games and why it's actually important to keep doing what you love to do. If you love video games so much that you want to play them every single weekend, then you should absolutely do it. If you love action figures and you want to keep collecting them, then you should absolutely do it. If you want to actually do a side hustle and earn extra money anytime on your free time, then you should absolutely do it. I hope you guys are all doing well, staying safe, and as always, everybody, thank you very much for watching. Good journey. Geek proud, everybody.